So my younger sister, Pamela, was struggling with mental health issues when she was in college. She had to be admitted to the hospital. She was having what at the time we were told was a breakdown. Multiple hospitalizations later, about 6 months into her journey, when some self-harm symptoms started, suicidal thoughts, difficulty with impulsive behaviors and expressing herself in relationships, she finally got a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. And my sister passed away in 2001. She died because of a medication error. So the grief that first couple of years was just really trying to understand what happened, why did it happen, and dealing with that sort of shame, blame, and guilt that a lot of surviving family members feel. The more people came up to us and said that they really related and that they wanted to do more for people with BPD, really caused us to be thinking more broadly about how we can use Pamela's story for good and for change.
Hi, I'm Kyle, and you were just listening to Paula, who was the first guest on MedCircle's podcast hosted by Jackie Colbeth. It's All in Your Head. New episodes come out each Monday, and we recap them here on YouTube each Wednesday. It's my pleasure to introduce to you the host of It's All in Your Head podcast, Jackie Colbeth.
Hey, Kyle.
Hi, Jackie Colbeth. Nice to see you.
It's always nice to see you.
Congrats on the launch of this podcast. So
Thank
far,
you.
It's gotten great reviews. And if it didn't, I would tell you, I'd be honest, but I haven't
Well, I
gotten
knew you would.
reviews.
I know you would.
I want to start, we'll talk about Paula's story in a little bit, but I wanted to ask you, when was the first time, if you remember, hearing about borderline personality disorder?
It was recent, meaning I was pretty ignorant on the topic, and I, I'm someone who's felt pretty educated, maybe more so through my own experiences, but I had first heard of borderline probably only about 5 years ago. It was a family friend had a child who was struggling with this diagnosis, and everyone was like, well, what is this? Because last year she was diagnosed as ADD. The next year she was diagnosed bipolar, and this poor girl went through multiple diagnoses just because the symptoms for BPD, include one or if not all of these things. So when she finally arrived at the correct diagnosis, then it was like, okay, let's dive in and learn about BPD, because I think people associate it with multiple personality disorder. It's not that. Yeah. So there's just really a ways to go, I think, with learning more about that and destigmatizing it.
Yeah, MedCircle viewers might remember an interview I had with a woman named Sammy Grimm, who was misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder a few times in her life until she got the correct diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. And you can imagine, especially with a misdiagnosis like that, with bipolar disorder, you're getting put on meds that are very strong and treating something that maybe you don't even have in the first place, which is why I love that you're opening your podcast with the topic of BPD. It's something that I only learned about when I joined MedCircle, and I talked to Dr. Ramani, and we went through the 10 personality disorders, and we spent a lot of time on BPD because it is, I call it the most stigmatized and misunderstood disorder.
I agree.
And, I'm not an expert, but I talk to a lot of experts. So when you're talking, give us some background in case they haven't seen or listened to the episode on who Paula is, because we feature doctors, we feature people with lived experience, and Paula's a supporter of very unique, well, actually it's not unique. There's millions of supporters out there, but a story that we haven't shared on MedCircle. Tell us about Paula.
Sure. So Paula and her family, as she had mentioned, and we saw in the clip, they experienced a great tragedy when their daughter and Paula's sister, Pamela, passed away due to a medication error back in 2001. I found it, well, when I had met Paula, it was through some philanthropic efforts and people we knew within the mental health community, and for good reason, thought, we should connect these two ladies and these two people. They have a similar mission, which is, dedicating a portion of our lives. And in Paula's case, running an entire charitable organization, and in dedicating parts of our life to destigmatizing disorders that are highly stigmatized. So we had hit it off, and I said, I'm creating a podcast. MedCircle's creating a podcast. Borderline is something I would love, if we could, to use the platform to reach people and talk about it. And I was really touched because, to your point, Paula wasn't diagnosed with this. She's not a psychiatrist, but most importantly, she is a family member. She had a loved one who struggled with this. And sometimes I think for us, people who are diagnosed, call us patients, whatever you will, that can be all consuming and all encompassing. And I think what would help both parties through that journey is hearing from loved ones, hearing from people that are there through the thick, through the thin, that have seen this person at their worst, at their best, and have always championed them. The family, or substitute a good friend, whatever support network you have of what we'll call advocates or loved ones. I think a lot of times people feel alone in their disorder, and they kind of just don't even see that there's people out there that do love them and they want to help, and they might just not know how to express that, or the person doesn't know how to receive it. So I like the fact that we could highlight a family member, a loved one, a supporter who now dedicates her time and her spare energy to all things that's erasing the stigma of BPD.
Well said. My favorite part of your podcast and discussion with Paula was actually the story she shared about going on a march to raise awareness for BPD, or I think it was just a mental health awareness march. And she invited, some people on social media and thought she might get 10 people to show up for the mothers and others who support those with BPD. And then 60 people showed up. And I wanted to highlight that because if you're out there listening to this and you're living with BPD, I know it can feel that you are all by yourself and that no one is going to march and no one is going to raise a sign for you. And not only did Paula garner the support from her friends, family, and friends and family members, she also garnered the support of total strangers who came out to show that they support those living with BPD. And so things are happening. Things are moving. I think we've done a great job on MedCircle destigmatizing BPD, and it takes a village, and we're not through. But things are changing, and I think we are moving in a healthier direction, looking at, especially when it comes to personality disorders, but looking at borderline personality disorder through the lens of facts instead of stigma, the lens of facts instead of stigma. What would your hope be, Jackie, after talking to Paula and talking to the other guests on your podcast about where the future of BPD goes?
Well, I mean, and again, I barely got through college with a communications degree. I'm no doctor by any means. So as far as the future, the good news is there's nowhere to go but up, right? Something so stigmatized, all the work that you put in is, eventually digging sort of out of the stigma. And I think the more people who share their experience about it, courage is contagious. I say that all the time. Sharing, people like Sarah, people like Paula. Sarah's on next week, and she struggles with the diagnosis of BPD. But listening to Paula, a loved one of someone with BPD, listening to Sarah, I think where it goes from here is teaching, educating. Emotions Matter is just a major educational and support tool. You can go on their site and you can really get a ton of knowledge and really get set straight, I think, in any misconceptions that you might have. So I think really the future is, of course, it's going to be studied more by medical doctors and, the neurons in the brain and all that they do. But from our end, I think just talking, sharing that in turn normalizes it to a degree, which in turn destigmatizes it to a degree, and you really build from there. So really courageous people like Paula and Sarah, they paved the way, I think, when it comes to understanding the most about it, really.
And next week's episode will premiere on Monday, and you can listen or watch that wherever you listen and watch your podcasts. We have a viewer comment, Jackie, that I'd like to share with you, Bridget.
I'm scared. I don't read. I'm scared. It's hard to read them.
Candace is nice, right? Candace, you're going to be nice. Candace says, thank you.
Please, Candace, be nice.
I was diagnosed with BPD when I was 16. I'm now 38 and still learning about it. Hey, I was diagnosed with depression when I was 9. I'm 36 and still learning about it. No question.
And I've been diagnosed up and down the age range, and I'm still learning too. Candace, I love, thank you for sharing that, first of all.
Yeah.
Does that not highlight, I mean, everything you need to know, which is you need to know more. Yeah. We need to know more about it. We need to learn more. I mean, to be on that struggle, so to speak, you know, that long and still learning, I think, I mean, Candace really nailed it. You never really stop learning, but certainly with something like borderline, I do think the learning curve's a little tougher because of lack of info.
Yeah. And by the way, we start a lot of MedCircle meetings with our diagnoses. I mean, how Jackie just mentioned her diagnosis, I mentioned mine, Candace mentioned hers. It is at MedCircle, it is like saying, hey, I'm Kyle, I'm 36, depressed. You go, I'm so-and-so, 38.
Right. Or I say like, hi, I'm really irritable this week. I haven't had a ton of sleep. So like, don't really engage with me on any sort of combative level. No, it's it's refreshing.
Yeah, it really is refreshing. And not to get too off topic, but I had a friend who's does not work at MedCircle, obviously. And she confided in me and told me that she was diagnosed with depression and is taking antidepressants. And she told me, you know, it was a moment for her, and that she was confiding me in. And I hadn't viewed that as a moment in such a long time because of how much I see it, you know, and how much I'm open to it. And so we can very easily forget, as much as Jackie and I can sit here and chuckle with our diagnoses, that for many people, it's day one of the fight. It's day one of the journey. You know, chuckling sometimes comes after you've been down the pathway a little bit.
Oh yeah, way after. I don't think me or anyone was laughing, you know, early on, but what I love, and you know this, Kyle, because you've been on camera, you're the face of MedCircle. You've been fielding this for years, but once you share where you work, you know, mental health, education, credentialed, preventative care, or you share your diagnosis, right? I struggle with depression. I don't think people realize when you share that with one person, they open all the way up. I would say more times than not, you know, hey, what do you do? It's a common thing we ask, and tell people. And all of a sudden, I mean, I was at a flooring company getting new floors. They asked me where I worked. I told them MedCircle, what do you do, etc. Well, next thing I know, the sales associate's in her phone. She's like, you know, my aunt's a hoarder and it's just been, you know, a nightmare experience. She's pulling out her phone, showing me photos, going into like her family history, which like I love, but you know, I'm also like impressed and equally shocked, because once you just tell someone like, I'm hip to mental health. I want everyone to feel good about themselves. I want the suicide rate to go all the way down. Once you start talking about that to people, whether they have anything, you know, going on themselves, they just open right up. I mean, to the point where sometimes I'm just like, okay, you know, like keep talking, keep telling me, but it never ceases to amaze me. As soon as it comes out, people respond.
Yeah, they really do. And just as a reminder, Jackie Colbeth and Kyle Kittleson are not mental health professionals. We are not doctors, psychologists, or psychiatrists. We're just two human beings having a conversation. Okay. Not that anyone was sitting here thinking they must be doctors.
And if you did, you should go see a doctor.
Yeah, you probably need to go see a doctor. Yeah, exactly. There was a comment in the live chat. I thought it was fabulous. She said, one of my biggest issues with borderline personality disorder is the name. And Dr. Romani has brought this up.
Yes.
Oh, here it is. What about changing the name of this disorder? It's not accurate. And something like emotional dysregulation speaks more to me.
Yep.
It's like you're quoting Dr. Romani. I believe when I asked her, what would you call it? She said emotional dysregulation disorder. Yeah.
Of course, because people who put the nomenclature on aren't the ones who are typically experiencing it. So, you're naming something, but you're not really knowing, the nuances, of what it's like. I feel the same way about bipolar disorder.
Yeah.
In the sense where people just assume, you are on, they don't know it's a spectrum. So, there are diagnoses like bipolar 1, bipolar 2, but just the word bipolar, people think nuts. They think like, I'm going to be talking to you, and then in like 2 seconds from now, I'm going to start screaming and throwing things. Like there's a lot of ignorance just with the word bipolar. I'm not necessarily pinging off either end of the spectrum at any given time. So I appreciate the viewers saying that. If it were up to me, we'd go through the DSM-5 and give everything more accurate names, because the people naming them don't live with the stigma.
Yeah, we need a rebrand. We got to rebrand some of these things. Bring it into 2023.
I love that. We can do that.
We can rebrand it.
I love a good rebrand.
Now I want to get serious a little bit, Jackie, because the launch of your podcast with this discussion with Paula had a lot of inspiring moments and hopeful moments. And I would say it leaned more that direction. But at the heart of all this and at the foundation, there was a major loss, Paula's sister. And it was something that, to my knowledge, we've never discussed on MedCircle. Never, ever, ever. We've talked about different consequences for, struggling with mental health, but never a medication that resulted in someone's death. And even me bringing this up now, I don't want to stigmatize medication. I don't want to make people to be afraid of it, but I also want to tell the truth and tell the story. So can you give us a little insight and recap on the story of Paula's sister?
Sure. So, I'll say this, Paula and her mother wrote a book called Remnants of a Life on Paper. It is journals that Pamela had written, they found posthumously, and published them alongside their editorial of what was going on at the same time. Pamela was a fighter. She fought hard. Beautiful, talented girl. You read through all this, and people have a misconception, it happens, but people just assume if you're diagnosed with a mental illness that you just commit suicide when you die. No, I mean, people write it off like, oh, well, she struggled with depression, she's dead, she must have committed suicide. And that is not always the case. And that should not be the reflex that people go to, because I can attest personally, I've been put on horrible medications in the past with horrific side effects. And I think people don't understand the power of prescription drugs.
Right.
We hear a lot about illegal drugs. We've been hearing about that since, middle school. But these psychotropic drugs don't interact with everybody. They are a foreign substance, you're ingesting. And again, I'm not for or against it. But what I do want to highlight is that people do lose their lives who struggle with this due to medication errors, because these medications are no joke. And I think people, you can flippantly like, oh, did you take your meds today? As if it's like a Tylenol. I've ended up in the emergency room with like getting poisoning from some of the pills I was prescribed many decades ago. And it's a real thing. And I think it's worth noting. So our viewers can, have that additional piece of knowledge, if you're talking about it, it's something just to be cognizant of. It's hard because there's all sorts of premature ways people who struggle with mental illnesses can die. And we all know this. And it scares me on a personal level. It's such a tragedy, but you would be totally remiss if you just chalked every death up for someone who's diagnosed with any sort of mental health disorder is a suicide, because it's not.
Yeah. Well said. And that story goes into more detail into the first episode of It's All in Your Head, the podcast. It's MedCircle's first podcast, hosted by the one and only right here, Jackie Colbeth. It's a great launch and discussion around that. And we might have talked about this already, Jackie, but I can't remember, and I'm curious to know the answer anyway. Why did you decide to start with the topic of BPD? I mean, your first and second episodes tackle this topic from a supporter and lived experience standpoint.
Sure. So as you well know, Kyle, at MedCircle, and this is the truth. We listen to our audience. You need audience feedback, and we value that greatly. The reason I picked BPD, borderline personality disorder, is I have access to see what the audience wants to consume. And if I ignored access to the topics that they're most interested in, I think it would be like a really crappy launch. So in all honesty, I really wanted to focus on, well, what are people on MedCircle most hungry to learn more about?
Yeah.
And through multiple indicators,
yes,
it was BPD. So it was actually an easy decision. But as far as topics, that's typically, how it goes. We want to be useful and helpful. So in turn, we do weigh and listen a lot and read every comment, every email, all of it.
Yeah. And there's a rounding out that I find when we are presented with the viewpoints you are showcasing on your podcast, because on MedCircle, especially for our paying members on MedCircle.com and watch.medcircle.com, hey, if you're watching this on YouTube, MedCircle has a whole website. If you like what we have on YouTube, you'll love what's on MedCircle.com.
Yeah.
But we really focus on the experts in their field, the doctors at the tippity top of their game in that niche, and we get them on and we ask them questions and they share their insight. And we've done a little bit of patient stories, but not so much. And then you come through with the lived experience, with the supporter experience, and now you're getting a holistic look at the BPD experience, both from diagnostically and the DSM, from a doctor, someone living with BPD, and someone supporting somebody with BPD. And we have a large percentage of viewers and watchers are mental health professionals.
Yeah.
And people sometimes are surprised by that. They go, well, why would professionals come to you? Because you're educating the masses. And I go, well, the professionals are part of the masses. And how great for them to hear somebody share their story that's not their patient, or talk to a supporter, or listen to a supporter talking about how to support somebody with BPD. I get emails from those clinicians that say, that is why I tune in. That is why I'm a MedCircle member, because I want that side of the story. And you are providing that. And it's just fabulous.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Kyle. I appreciate it. I mean, I think anyone who's diagnosed with anything can agree. You feel marginalized initially, and your sense of agency can feel like it's kind of been taken away, right? Shuttle here, shuttle there. And I think it goes a long way, and it does a body good, so to speak, to have that sense of agency. And you can get that through educational content, whether you're a professional, whether you're a patient, whether you're a loved one. I think it's important and helps, make you feel more confident in whatever you struggle with and whoever you struggle with it around, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yes. We have a comment I'd like to throw up on the screen here. This person, we're back with Candace. Hi, Candace.
What is 6
On
months?
top of borderline personality disorder, trying to deal with it, I turned to drugs, and now I'm a recovering addict of 6 months. 6 months right there. Jackie, any thoughts?
Candace, keep going, girlfriend. 6 months is huge. I don't know. So I haven't had a drink in God willing, it'll be 20 years. So I get the recovery journey. I get the addiction journey. And 6 months is something you should be so proud of. I mean, I remember racking up like a day or two without having any alcohol, and it felt near impossible. But 6 months is an accomplishment, and I'm proud. I don't know you, but I'm proud of you. It's hard to get to. So I hope you continue on with that. And I think, at least in my experience, it was easier for me to deal with my bipolar 2 diagnosis after I cut all the crap like out of my system, right? Or, you know, you're kind of just detoxing and you're getting all the junk out of there. And I think, in good news, you know, for Candace, if this is true for her too, it helped me deal with the stigma, the diagnosis, the depressions that I would have after getting off alcohol in my case. So I think the longer you refrain, the easier it becomes to deal with the diagnosis.
Yeah. And we know that substance use and mental health conditions co-occur at very high rates. And it was very clear to me. I think Dr. Judy told me this. Dr. Judy is a triple board forensic and neuropsychologist and one of the MedCircle doctors. We actually just had a fabulous workshop on how to stop self-sabotage this morning. So if you were a member, you probably saw it. If you're not a member, you can watch the replay. But the point is that those struggling with substance use and a co-occurring mental health condition like BPD, often, sometimes you can tackle it all at the same time, but sometimes you just gotta take care of the substance first.
Oh, I think so. I mean, because here's what happens too, Kyle. If I'm strung out or I'm drunk, my behavior, even if I wasn't a bipolar, my behavior is going to very much make people think that or believe that, or a doctor at that time could have, you know, diagnosed me with that by the DSM criteria and I would have hit it. But that's because I was either strung out, hungover, and those symptoms anyone would get. So compound it with what's really going on and what the drugs and alcohol are trying to cover up or trying to heal. It's definitely something that I think it's just easier, you know, if you're putting the poison in, you get like a little reprieve in a clearer head.
Yeah, I think so too. And we can always hope that our doctors are smart enough and careful enough to tease out every little thing, but it's not always the case. And that's why being an educated, empowered patient makes all the difference. I really believe that. We have 2 fabulous resources I'd love to leave our viewers with. I'll ask Bridget to put them in the description of this video. Both are series on borderline personality disorder with clinical psychologist Dr. Ramani. The first one is about BPD, and it's more, anyone can watch it, but it's certainly people who are living with BPD. It's targeted for them. It gives you the overview. It goes through the DSM. It talks about the questions to ask a doctor, where it's stigmatized, what the truth is, get rid of all the myths of BPD. It's a very nice, comprehensive overview. Then our second series is actually for supporters. So if your child is living with BPD, if your spouse, if you have a coworker or friend with BPD, and you're sitting here going, I want to know how to love them. I want to know how.
Yeah.
In this series, we talk about how to do that while also loving yourself and taking care of yourself. And so it's a great series. We'll link to both of those in the description of this video. Jackie, what can viewers expect in next week's It's All in Your Head episode?
Sure. So next week, we are talking to Sarah Rosenberg. Sarah was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder in her later teens, and is someone, you know, in my opinion, that just, she got down to work. You know, she took major part in her recovery, and, you know, she took the bull by the horns, and she lives an unbelievably fulfilling life now and spends her time actually giving back to her community of fellow BPD
awesome
people who struggle with that, right? And she's on the board of directors for Emotions Matter, so business is her background. So she's been able to apply, her brilliance in business onto making sure that Emotions Matter reaches as many people as humanly possible. And her contributions to that organization are just very noteworthy is an understatement. And I just think people are going to be really inspired by her story. She's a great storyteller.
Great. And if you are curious to see who Jackie is going to be talking with for the first, I'll call it, season of It's All in Your Head, you can go to medcircle.com/podcast. I'm giving y'all a lot to do. I'm like, go to medcircle.com, go watch this series, go subscribe to this podcast. All right. Pick and choose what you like. But at medcircle.com/podcast, we have the list of upcoming episodes, the topics that will be discussed, the guests who will be featured. There's some great ones. I will tell you, I'm most looking forward to this. I have not heard these episodes, so I listened to them on Monday with everybody else. Mm-hmm. But on week 5 or 6, we go into pornography, sex, and digital addiction.
Oh yeah.
And I think it's prevalent. I think it's relevant, and yes. The really brave, honest people came on to talk about this. And so I'm very amped for those topics to come up. So Jackie, your podcast, it's so good. I still got to go rate it. I still got to go give it a rating though. I get
scared. Like I'll check because, you want to see if it's received. So like I'll look at the views, but I'm afraid if a comment pops up, it's just going to like totally kill my day. And I'm going to be like, so I try to like see it, not see it.
Yeah. Well, it's the internet. There are going to be haters out there, but that's
haters
part
gonna
of it.
Hate.
Hey, I love the haters. Even a thumbs down helps the algorithm, So I love anybody who participates. Jackie, thank you so much. Here's a sneak peek to next week's episode. It's All in Your Head podcast with Jackie Colbeth.
By the time I got diagnosed, which was about at age 25, I had already had like serious attempts to end my life. The way I got my diagnosis was actually during my first hospitalization. They told me I wouldn't get discharged unless I agreed to go to a therapist within the hospital. And at that point, I was like, you know what, this is crazy. Like I'm going to die if I don't take care of this. Yeah. And I wanted to get better at that point. They did tell me that I'm going to have it for the rest of my life. And I basically thought that I'll never get better. And I didn't know how I was going to live like that. It was just an impossible way to live, just getting worse and worse.
Yeah.
Turns out I did get better, but I didn't realize that at the time that it was going to be possible.